The first issue which is teed up here overall is sewage disposal. The city is in good shape in terms of addressing the new phosphorus standards which are being implemented at the federal level. In fact, Bristol is going to be one of the first communities in the state to be addressing that, which is a positive sign. The chief nemesis is not the right word, the chief challenge that most water pollution control facilities have is infiltration of water into the sewer system. We end up paying for treatment of sewage, which it was rainwater, it's clean water that got into our system. And Bristol has a particular problem because the early sewer system that was installed in the city was clay pipe with rope hemp, and they don't hold up well over hundreds of years. The city has invested in a grub truck which actually goes through the sewer pipes and actually fixes it as it goes, and they're having so much success with that they're considering buying another one. So as a result, the treatment capacity of the system is expected to be adequate as they address this inflow and infiltration problem, and they're moving aggressively in that area. The sewage facility itself is expected to be adequate in terms of its size. The grouting of the lines is making significant progress, and they're trying to address those other situations. So I think sewer's in pretty good shape. The map, which is on page 27, shows the areas of the city. The green areas are areas which are existing sewer service areas. The red is what are called sewer avoidance areas. And, these are sewer avoidance because they're essentially open space or watershed lands and other things like that, so we don't expect to ever have demand from those. And then the white areas are depending on the circumstances or situations in the future that sewer service could be expanded within these areas.
Before you leave page 26, I think probably one of the most important bullets on sewage disposal is the third bullet down. Future sewer extensions will generally be provided by private developers. Basically, what I've been told by the superintendent of the sewer treatment facility is that the city is not proactively extending sewer lines into undeveloped areas of the city in order to encourage new developments. That if developers want to extend sewer lines, as you know, to areas in order to open up development, they're going to pay the cost of that.
On page 28, we did get into discussion of the water supply. Again, down at the bottom of the page, because of improvements in a trend towards water conservation, that the water supply system is expected to be adequate. Whether or not Cook's Dam is going to be needed is something that they're monitoring to just kind of keep aware of, because as you know, it's been on the city's agenda for quite some time. So we're kind of at a fork in the road here in the following way, that if trends continue the way that they have been, that the current system should be adequate to meet the city's needs for the planning period. That's good news. Bad news is that there is this impetus going on at the state level for stream flow regulations. The basic idea meaning that we can't just impound water and then have our rivers and streams go dry. There's a biological component to our rivers, so as a result, to maintain the health, there needs to be minimum stream flow. Well, that means we're releasing water from the reservoir, which means that there's less water available for businesses and residents. So it's not decided yet exactly how this is all going to play out. The water department is concerned about this in terms of, they sort of thought they were in pretty good shape, but now they're not so sure. So they're monitoring it, they're very involved in it. But as we mentioned here in the plan, that the adequacy of the system may need to be reevaluated. We may still be okay based on water efficiency, et cetera, but then again, if we have to release water from the reservoirs, we may not. There's also an interesting thing going on in terms of the pattern of rainfall events that are going on overall, that we are tending to get climatically more severe storms in bursts. And those are challenging for a water system to be able to capture the water because you don't want to overtop the dam or the reservoir. We're better off with sort of more evenly spread out water, particularly if the rainfall falls at the time that people use it, so therefore we sort of moderate. So there are a number of issues that are going on, which is why the phrase which was used in here was reevaluated. This is the type of thing we think that the lights are kind of tending towards green, that we're going to be okay, but just something for us to keep our eyes on as we go forward.
There's no mention of encouraging manufacturing entities to go to a water conservation system here. Is that something that should be separate? I know that where I work, we're very big on water conservation, and we've cut our consumption, I believe, by over 90%. What we used to, and we used to think nothing of just using millions and millions of gallons a day, and we've engineered solutions to eliminate that. So I'm not sure if somewhere there's something to address.
Earlier on, in booklet 5, which is conservation strategies, there was recommendations about water conservation as being, but what might make sense here is to put a link back to that and say, the plan recommends on page blankety blank.
Okay.
Map on page 29 identifies water service areas in the city. Again, we have the blue indicating the existing water service area. There's 2 zones in the city, higher pressure and lower pressure. And the only reason that those 2 zones exist in this way is it's really sort of elevation and topography. The higher the water tanks are, that if you were at the lowest elevation in Bristol, then the pressure when you turn on your pipe is not good. So the issue is they actually throttle back the pressure in the lower pressure zone so that it continues to provide adequate flow for people but doesn't create plumbing problems in their house. And the red areas, again, are just areas because of the existing land use. We don't expect or anticipate the need to send water to these areas.
Real quick before we do this.
Thank you.
Again, the bullet point about page 28, future water extensions are generally provided by private developers. Again, the water department is not in the business, at least at this point in time, of proactively extending water lines out and opening up new areas of development. Their focus is really on improving the system that's there now, including trying to boost pressure in some places through, trying to create more loops in the system so that if you have the more dead ends you have in the water system, the harder it is to maintain pressure. And if you have a pipe break someplace, whereas if the system is, the more loops in the system, things are connected back to one another. It just makes for a better system, better pressure, and less potential loss of water flow. So.
On page 30, the first strategy we address here is the issue about stormwater drainage. Drainage is an increasing issue of concern around the country, both in terms of water quality and water quantity. Back in the conservation booklet, we did talk about LID, or low impact development techniques, as a way to address drainage. This is, again, where we try to get drainage, try to minimize drainage that gets into pipes, gets accelerated, gets discharged downstream, because that does 2 things. First of all, it takes water out of the natural water cycle in terms of base water flow in the ground, and secondly, it exacerbates flooding downstream. So Bristol has a challenge in this because the city was built up in a different time and place when this wasn't a concern, so it's going to be difficult for us to go back and retrofit. But I think trying to be a little bit greener on this is an aspiration here for the city. I was actually at a seminar last week with some of the representatives from Public Works. And some areas around the country are looking at the concept of a stormwater utility. And the reason being is that right now, rainwater is something everybody just assumes is going to get rid of. And so if I'm upstream of Allen, my job is to get rid of my stormwater, right?
Yeah.
But he's downstream of me. And then it goes downstream, and everybody sort of deals with it. And there's really no effective methodology in place to kind of address this. So it's a fairly controversial type topic in terms of what's going to happen here. So the plan doesn't mention anything about it, but it is the type of thing that may show up. So I think my suggestion for consideration here is that we highlight the importance of stormwater, but methodology in terms of how it might get addressed is not. There's a whole bunch of different ways this could happen. Wireless communication. We are in, again, a state of flux when it comes to wireless communication. There's a surprising number of households around the country that are giving up landlines. They're simply saying, we don't need them. Why would I pay for it, except as part of my Comcast bundle or charter bundle? In fact, I can get reasonable cell phone service, so I'm just going to use my phone. So the challenge that can come with that is that we rely on 911 systems and services, but if people are also going to have emergencies that they need to call 911, what happens if they don't have reasonable service? So communities are struggling with this a little bit. They're concerned about wireless towers and the impact on the aesthetics of the community and a number of other issues associated with that. And then some communities are saying, but it's important for public health, safety, and quality of life, so we ought to do it. What are your thoughts in terms of goals or strategies for Bristol in terms of wireless communications?
Yeah, it's an economic development issue, too.
I don't think we're going to get rid of it. It's around. Well, I'm not totally thrilled with it all the time. Something we're going to have to plan. I mean, I know the building is down in Bristol on Valley Street, the old Sigma thing. They had a bunch of the cell things sitting out there. I know Unionville, the church down in the center of town, rented out their steeple, that need to be replaced, and put the cell tower in there. If things like that could be done in some of the churches or some of the bigger places around here, I think it's something that would be worthwhile to look at. I mean, no one wants to. I've been down south, and I'll tell you, the cell towers look like trees. Ain't no trees in there. Okay, there ain't no tree down there looking like that.
Nothing that tall?
Yeah, ain't nothing that tall down there.
Well,
We've gotten requests to put these antennas where they can be leased from the city, and the city makes some money on it.
Yep.
Whenever we get one of these, I just wonder, is there a capacity that at some point you reach, or can this go on and on forever and ever? This is one of those things I suspect that whatever we put down here will change by the time we leave the room. Because it changes.
That's a good point, Jim, because I think if you're familiar with the terminology, we're now at a 4G, we call it.
Yeah.
So basically, the first generation of wireless communication involved a fairly rare demand. We had tall towers that were designed to try to cover as big area as possible, and we had multiple, up to 6 providers wanted to be on each tower. And there's vertical separation, so we were getting 200-foot towers that really kind of stuck out on the landscape. As the generations have gotten better, the capacity has increased and the usage has increased. So now there's much more data that goes over these systems and networks. And in fact, they've started to backfill in. That now the towers don't need to be as small because they're going to have more cells as part of this cellular network. So there are some locations, in particular, for example, in the downtown, where they can go with nanocells and picocells, they call them, which is because of the capacity and demand on the system, they can't handle just one tower, so they go with the panel arrays in multiple locations around the downtown. So this can be the type of thing that over time will evolve in a way that it almost becomes transparent in the system, and we won't really be, I don't think the towers are going away anytime soon, but we may start to backfill. And it's like looking at the old Dick Tracy comics. If you had told me years ago that I would have a computer on my wrist, I would have told you were crazy. And yet here we are in a situation that we're almost there. So one of the things I shared with Alan and Bob was that the Connecticut Siting Council is the state entity that regulates towers. Legislation has been passed which allows a municipality to have cellular coverage as part of its plan. And there is a provision now in state law which allows the municipality to request a coverage map from the Connecticut Siting Council. They reach out to the major phone companies, get their data in, compile it into a composite map, and then they will share that with us. So in other words, we don't know whose coverage is where, but it shows us that there's gaps in the city. And then, as part of the plan, we can consider this information and you know, if we're concerned about towers in that area, then we can provide policies, and if we're not so concerned or we're comfortable with it, we can at least identify it. So if it's all right with you guys, I think request that information from the siting council, see what we get back, and then see if it leads us in any sort of direction as a policy.
Yeah, most definitely.
You want to say something, Gary?
No. No, well, I did, but sort of covered it.
Thank you.
And then the last element here for discussion on this page is the issue of energy. And really, the city has established an energy task force. They've done comprehensive energy audits, and they're investigating and implementing programs related to energy. So we just want to kind of point that out, and again, this is something different than prior. Page 31 are our goals. The overall goal is to support the provision of water, sewer, and other utility services to serve the needs of the community. And the things that we talked about earlier in terms of sanitary, water, wireless communications, energy efficiency, etc., are identified.
Should that goal be qualified to say support the provision of adequate or some kind of adjective?
The two things I think I wanted to talk with you about, particularly number 6, I'm looking at the verb encourage. And I wonder, is that the right verb here? Encourage the provision of wireless communication services. I wonder if it should be more neutral. Address. I mean, the question is, I don't know how aggressive we're going to get about it because we don't have all the information we need right now. I mean, I'm not sure.
How about support?
Did you both address and support?
Now, I think I would suggest
Just the
that,
one?
I like Alan's suggestion here. I think encourage is a little stronger than support. And again, I think I'd like to have, for the commission, this commission, the zoning commission, and others, the council, to have a little wiggle room here. That if somebody was to propose a tower in the most sensitive location in Bristol, and they're going to throw back this language, I think the issue would be, you know, support where appropriate or something else like that. I'd like us to have the ability to say, yes, we want better cell phone coverage, but really, did you have to do it there? And have that type of situation.
What's number 7?
Number 7 is a cross-out. Thank you very much for that. And then number 9. This is kind of a forward-thinking philosophy, but what many communities learned from some of the storm-related incidents we've had in the last couple of years and loss of power is that depending on where you are in the grid and the network, it can take a while to get power back. And we need emergency shelters. We need opportunities and situations to be able to deal with this. So yes, we can install emergency generators on all of our facilities, or in fact, some communities have gone ahead and established with state assistance, the state has been helping to fund us, what's known as a microgrid. And some microgrids which have been established, it's just a small self-contained grid that runs off a fuel cell. So it's disconnected from the major electrical system. You get all the electricity and stuff you need, but it doesn't require a wire bringing the electricity in. It just works by itself. And we're starting to have the fuel cell technology and other things to do this. So I added this into the plan. Again, the verb here is investigate the desirability of. I'm not saying it's right for Bristol, but in the downtown area, if we start thinking about, you know, Little Memorial School possibly be an emergency shelter or provide that opportunity, or maybe we can connect to police, fire, city hall, churches, schools, elderly housing, just a whole bunch of other players. But just get onto this microgrid. And the issue is, listen, if we have issues or situations in the future, these are the facilities that will always be operating, and that's important for us. So I think the verb's okay, and I just wanted to get that on the radar. And then that's it for both of number 7. Any other thoughts or changes? Just as a quick heads up, our next meeting is for November. Anticipate I don't think it's going to be a normal length meeting. It'll probably be shorter. There's 2 things I'd like to address with you that night.
Is there a date on that?
It's whatever the first Wednesday in November.
First Wednesday.
And with
Four?
Four is election day.
November
Right.
5th.
What are we talking
yes, it is
about?
the fifth.
Yeah, 4th is election.
Right,
So the two issues on the agenda that night would be, number one, we do have included as part of our scope of work a telephone survey. So we will have questions for you to go through, and then following that meeting, we're going to be in the field within days. The main reason being, I want to get the responses back so that they can be incorporated into the plan, but also to make sure that we capture people before Thanksgiving and everything like that goes on. And then the second thing on the agenda that night will be just kind of a roundtable discussion about implementation. How successful has the city been at implementing current or prior plans, and what strategies or recommendations might we recommend to improve, enhance implementation of this plan? So there's material before the meeting will be a draft of the telephone survey. I'm going to ask that we keep it, if people in the committee know what the questions are, they're going to be prepared for the question. I think a survey works best when people are asked for their honest thoughts or feelings without having been coached or addressed or other things like that. So that's what I have.
And if I might, we weren't sure that we were going to be able to meet on the first Wednesday because that would have been zoning board of appeals meeting because of election day.
Oh,
They got-
okay.
But ZBA is not going to be meeting in November. I think the meeting room, first floor meeting room, is being used that night. I'm not 100% sure. We'll check. We'll let you know. If we can't get the first floor meeting room, we'll have to meet in the public works conference room.
That's fine.
But we'll let you know. But
Okay.
one way or the other.
Next item,
Public comment?
public comments. We got 17 minutes and how many people?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you got a comment
get the whole 17 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, unless Steve wants to say something.
You got to leave the camera running.
Yeah, I'll do that. Can I sit at the table?
Sure.
I didn't write down anything. I don't have a speech. It's not my goal to preach to you all. I think you all.
Your
have
goal is
good
to inform
tips.
us.
Yeah, actually, I want to try to engage you in a conversation about the state's regional plan and how it affects the municipal plan of conservation and development. So I brought a handful of documents that I usually carry with me here and hope to interject. And basically, in regards to the city's plan of conservation and development, if you look at the endorsement letter from the continuing committee from the Legislative Committee on State Planning and Development, which was, the draft was released May 15, 2013. It actually says in there, growth-related projects not located within priority funding area. Basically, there's going to be a process for determining its consistency with the municipal plan of conservation and development. And that's where I'm going to leave that. Basically, I've been looking at a lot of different things about the transit-oriented development. The state's aggressively pursuing this. So, like Mr. Harrigan said, if it's not financially feasible to invest in something because we don't, for example, have enough people in our downtown to invest that much money in transit ridership. It doesn't mean that there isn't people that are willing to spend money. And in regards to Mr. Seward's comment, you mentioned that something about forcing people out of their automobiles. Somebody had made that comment. That was actually a gubernatorial candidate, Tom Foley, that said that. That was, I think, the Central CT Post. And I think I can, after reading all this stuff, I can kind of see that perspective, why people think that, because what happens is when your government spends money that you don't have, you impoverish people. And it's hard to see when you're doing good, but I can tell you when you're in a crunch and you're at the financial tipping point and you don't want your household expenditures to go towards anything that it doesn't absolutely have to, for example, having a traffic coordinator or bicycle routes that you're not going to use because we have snow here for a good part of the year. And by the way, bicycle routes I think are great as a recreational thing, as an alternate mode of travel. It's very dangerous. I would hesitate to encourage that kind of thing because I've tried to do that and I've almost gotten killed on several occasions. But there is a nice system of trails. If you go by the water company in St. Paul, you can go all the way down to Stevens Street, which isn't on your map. I wanted to mention that one. Now, if you look, the state of Connecticut, before the last POCD in 2007, they had a legislative program review and investigations committee report that was issued, and you can find that on, I believe, you know what, you can find it on the blog. But if anybody wants a link to that, I can definitely email it to you. I have it at home on my computer. Basically, Executive Order number 15 in 2006 brought up a number of initiatives in the legislative session for the state C&D plan. Basically, what you're looking at is the state wants to work off the responsible growth principles, which we're drafting our plan to do the same thing. And a lot of it has to do with environmental justice. And what I've found is the way the state is looking at this in terms of economic growth is they're looking at household income. I know I mentioned that at a previous meeting, Glenn, I think you took a note on it. You said you were going to check out that report. That was the housing report from the CCRPA, where it says that basically they're looking at 50% of income as affordable housing in combination with transportation costs. So rather than just looking at 30% of income, whether or not you have enough affordable housing stock, they're looking at 50%. And that's also reflected in another report that I found. And I got this from Capital Region Council of Governments website. And it has to do with smart growth and sustainable development. So basically the same project that this, Renaissance, you can't really say it's a Renaissance project. It's really a regional plan project, and Renaissance is just here to assist the city or the state, whoever, or the regional government, whoever's driving this. But that report basically says smart growth guidelines for sustainable development, and it also says the same thing in there. Nearly 50% of the people spending 52% of their budgets wrapped up in these two household expenses. So now the last real study that was done in regards to Bristol, it says that less than 2% of the population of Bristol is using public transportation. So that was why we didn't invest in the rail back then. And that really hasn't changed that much. And part of the reason could be because we don't have a good bus service. You really can't get from point A to point B well. And I don't see how having a fixed route of transportation, whether it be the CT Fast Track or light rail passenger service or whoever they're going to do, there's a very costly investment, and you're only going to be able to ride on a fixed route. So I find that the people that are interested in these policies are not so much the citizens of Bristol who are looking for transportation options or a place where they can live, walk, and breathe without a car, or however it is. It's basically developers want to invest in those properties in those surrounding areas because they can boost the property value by 30%, because those kind of properties are retaining their market value. Homes, single-family homes around the outside are losing their value. So at the same time that the state is aggressively investing, and I think that's the term that in the housing report it says radically invest. You're increasing taxation on families that if they don't want to invest in that, they really can't sell their house and move. They're kind of stuck in that position. So basically, you also need to look, I think, if you haven't already, Central Naugatuck Valley Regional Plan of Conservation Development, which was drafted in 2008, So if you go to the COG-CNV website, you can look at the demographics. They've done a lot of demographic reports, and which shows that manufacturing is shrinking drastically. We've lost like 33% of employment in the region for manufacturing. And I just think, after reading all this stuff, I mean, money-wise, it's just, I think it's just a terrible investment. It's a good investment for land use.
What's the terrible, the transit investment?
As far as for stimulating economic growth, I think you can't really support that it's going to boost economic growth, because you're taking money that people don't have, you're spending it on something that we don't need now, and you're saying, well, density areas have higher areas of economic growth. Well, sure they do, but they didn't get there because we spent money we didn't have. It got there because we had that. We already had local economic activity happening. I mean, if we've been placed into a box, and I could support that theory that we actually have been. It says right in here that Connecticut, in the Planning Organization Investigative Committee review, that Connecticut seeks to achieve greater regionalism in areas of government activities, whether the nature and pace of the efforts are underway or moving in the right direction, or whether or not stronger mandates or sanctions be needed, and so on and so forth. So, and they actually go into detail and say that, you know, we're moving more and more towards top-down approach. So, as we draft this plan, I also understand that if we don't coordinate with the state C&D plan, what will happen is we won't be eligible for municipal funding. And in this report, it actually says that that is the goal. It says, if certain municipalities find themselves at the tipping, it will be until they find themselves at the tipping point before they're willing to join in a regional project. It's kind of alarming, actually, and I know, you know, it's not in the forefront of the conversation anymore. It was, and then, you know, the state passed the regional growth laws right when this happened, then we passed the smart growth laws. Now, reducing carbon emissions, that's another story. You could put all this stuff together and say, yeah, we're investing in the planet, or we're trying to reduce carbon emissions, or we're trying to keep from using up all our land, our green land. These are things that we can do right here. I mean, you can encourage people to use alternate modes of transit without actually forcing them to pay for it. So I think that's where that philosophy of all forcing people out of their cars comes in. And I've just got so much information that I could say, and I don't want to talk on and on about it, but if anybody has any questions about my perspective on it and how I got to that, I mean, it's really drawn up. Environmental justice is part of the transportation planning process now. So wherever you have rail lines running through your downtown, there's going to be an effort on the state level to give people access to that fixed line of transportation. And so some of the people that are looking at invest it, they want to build density wherever transit hub is coming. And I see that happening here in Bristol. The problem with that is not everybody in Bristol really wants to see Bristol grow in population. We want, if you have to increase taxation, you're fighting yourself. You know what I mean? Nothing, I think, would promote people coming to Bristol better than having a nice, calm tax base and knowing how to plan ahead for your future. It was pretty interesting at the RTC meeting one night. We had Mr. Loretti, who's the mayor of, I believe, Sanford? Sheldon, who came, and he said, Sheldon's doing great. We don't have to hand out any grant monies to anybody on the municipal level to invest in our community. You know what brings people to our community? A consistent level of taxation. We haven't changed our mill rate in 20 years. And So I think when you take money out of the community and you give it to somebody in the community to build something specific, you're basically, special interests will get in line to take advantage of that. And the people that will benefit the most are the people that are wealthy. People that don't have access to transportation will flock to our downtown. Those people are supposed to have more money in their pocket, and that's supposed to stimulate economic growth. Meanwhile, our middle class is getting smaller and smaller. So this is big government policy. It's downtown Bristol. That's my perspective. And it's not all bad, but it's mostly bad for me. So I don't expect everyone to share my perspective, but I think it's important to just look at this from every angle.
Well, thank you for
If
your
anybody wants
comments.
to borrow any of this information, you can take it from me right now. Otherwise, I'll be posting that on my website. I took down all that stuff that I had posted before because I don't want to be in the middle of a Renaissance lawsuit, and I don't want everybody that blames Renaissance for what's going on there, I think, is out of line. Renaissance was hired by the city to do this. They didn't come in and tell us one thing and do it. Well, it's debatable. That could be debatable. But I'm not going to say that some on camera. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. Steve, you want to say anything?
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Second.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight.
And thanks very much for giving up a portion of your Saturday. I know it was a lot to ask, but I appreciate it because I think it's going to keep us on track and on
Yep.
schedule. So
Very good.
thank you very much.